Hi, I'm Michael Joy. Welcome to another reaction video. I want to say up front here, if you're a subscriber or catching this video randomly, just know that this is a mold making video. We make a lot of content here and I'm a professional mold maker, and so you may or may not want to be on this bus if you're interested in some other things. But for the makers out there, get ready. Hi, I'm Michael Joy. Welcome to another mold, I don't know what to call these. Reaction videos, hot tips, pro tips, watch the pro work. What do we call this? I like this guy. We have Richard Lambert again here, this French master craftsperson here. The video is two-part mold making of a glass bottle. The nice thing about making a mold of most shapes is there's the way this guy's doing it, there's the way this guy would do it, there's the way that guy would do it, and each technique can work. The idea of showing these videos is that there's tips and tricks from each person's technique. So I'll talk about the differences that I would do. They're not better than what Mr. Lambert would do. They're just differentiations of master craftspeople and the approach. Some of it has to do with how a person was taught. Some of it has to do with how a person figured things out just in the field, so to speak. So let me get comfortable here. Okay. I hate to interrupt because it's in French. I have to, because I don't know how fast, I haven't seen this video, so I don't know how fast it's going to go through. Whenever you're making a mold of a rigid, pre-manufactured shape, there's oftentimes seam lines to follow that are great indicators. However, if you do not make your parting line really clean, you're in trouble, especially with glass. It's going to lock into the mold and it's going to cause a lot of chip out. So let's see what he's doing here. He's saying, follow the manufacturer's parting line. In some shapes, the parting line is not accurate because, for example, a ceramic piece has come out of a mold, there's a seam line, but then it's handled by hands. So that means that somebody could have changed or distorted by putting on a handle on something, and they're not always true seam lines when they're in ceramic, but glass stays pretty true. He's going to level this out. It's very important that both axes are equal because he's going to put a lot of clay around this. This is optional. He could have made a three-part mold to catch that bottom lip, but it's just not needed on a bottle. You have to think about how your shape is going to be in finished ceramic, and if it's going to be a bottle sitting on a shelf, you know that the bottom of the bottle really isn't going to be significant to anybody. So I try to hide things in the places that are actually going to be sitting on the table or the shelf. There's another way to do this. He's going to build up a clay parting wall. What I used to do when I was in a hurry is I would line up this parting wall, the dividing lines like he is. I would close the bottle, I would build a box, and then I would pour liquid alginate, which is like Jello, and I would pour it up to the parting line. But in about 20 minutes, and that would set, and then I would pour my plaster on top. It's the fastest way that I know to make a dividing wall. You can do it in plaster, but it's not as forgiving as with alginate. When you're fast, one mold section like this will take you 1 hour to set up, or less. Some people, what they'll do is they'll add too much clay, and they spend a lot of time leveling clay that they're going to cut away anyways. We've seen that in another video. This is really nice to work with water-based clay because oil-based clay is hard on the hands, even if you warm it up. You can also block up the mold with wood, and you can put some pieces of cut 2x4 under there, and then put a thin piece of clay on top. That's another fast way. It has some restrictions because once that wood is under there, you can't cut it. So you have to go in with a pretty solid plan. Now, when he builds his parting walls, this part I did see already, he likes to build them down like this because when they're poured in plaster, they're going to be raised and he wants something to shave back down. That's a master mold maker move. I never did that. I always made them flat and clean to begin with, but had somebody taught me that trick, I would have utilized it a lot. So, thank you, Mr. French guy. All right, so that clay smooths nicely. Now he has a, in my shop I would always keep a bunch of these kind of cylinder shapes. They were basically prefab pouring gates. Saves you a little time of having to build them in clay. Yeah. The other thing is to just use an additive shape such as a funnel. The dollar stores, I don't know, I mean, we have them all over in Chicago. They have lots of great shapes for prefab mold making stuff. You don't have to turn them in the wood lathe or make them too fancy. You know, Walmart, Target, you can get a lot of really neat stuff there. Yeah, a little fussy, but it's okay. So he has to, it's not that he has to match his seam line, it's just that he has it drawn in there. So, because he turned it on a lathe, the whole gate is even. It doesn't matter if it spins. Yeah, we all have our favorite tools to use. It's funny. Like he'll use some tools that are his favorites and they were my least favorite. It's just how it sits in the hand. The wood tools are really nice because you can shape them. Just because you buy a wood tool doesn't mean you have to keep it that shape. You can just sand it down into whatever you want. We used to take the handles of toothbrushes and make sculpting tools out of those. You cut off the bristles and they sit nice in the hand. They have a good grip and you can just file them down and, you know, belt sand a nice tool for yourself. My master sculptor, Constantine, and his wife Stella, who I used to work with for 25 years, they sculpted, and he would basically, they could sculpt anything. I'll have to put up some pictures. I mean, like Michelangelo sculpture. And they just had this little towel, and then when they rolled it up like a lock-picking kit, it had maybe 8 tools. That's it. These were the other tools they had. It was incredible. Yeah, I miss those guys. They left the country, went back to Estonia. We actually have footage of them because I commissioned him to do paintings for the house. Yeah, Constantine and Stella were amazing. Some of this you've already seen. He's just marking it out, so I'm going to tell a little story. If you're new to our channel, we have a series called Absolute Joy, and there are a bunch of silly stories that I tell about various experiences that I had in art school or growing up in Arizona or something of this nature. But we also have something called mansion hunting. And mansion hunting is, there's a metaphysical side to me that I don't really talk about much on some of these other platforms. But you'll see my house in that, and it's about using the law of attraction to create abundance. But within that, you'll see the paintings that Constantine created, the reproductions of the Mirots, the Theodore Geisels, things like this. All right, enough stories. Let's get back to the mold. So he's basically, you see he's getting ready to trim away a lot of this clay. In my mind, I wouldn't have built that much clay, but it's fast. And you want to use a cutting motion versus a chopping motion. Now he likes an angle like this. I never did. I thought it didn't give a good compression. I used to make vertical walls and I would drag a square across there to tighten them up. But he has a slightly different technique. Yeah, water-based clay. I just stopped using it. When I left the ceramics department at the Art Institute, after I graduated, I stopped using water-based clay because it was a hassle to go buy and stuff like this, and it was always drying out, and I'd always forget it. The oil-based clay is really terrific. So if you've made one two-part mold, you understand the basics. Then there's subtle differences that are going to happen. In my mind, I would have built the parting wall. He had enough room to make it a little wider than an inch, and the volume of the glass bottle is such that there's going to be a fair amount of liquid slip into this bottle, and that means that the mold has to kind of be a bigger sponge. So I also like a little more space on the edges for some keys. Remember, I used to use the plastic natches, and so they demanded a fixed amount of space versus he uses his drill. Both ways work. The diluted mold soap. Put it right in front of the camera. I could never work with a watch in the shop. No rings. I mean, I'm married, but I don't wear the ring. I just didn't ever like things on my hands in the shop, and thank God my wife's cool with that. She said, "Oh, it's more money for her ring." You have to wear it.
Je vais mesurer mon carré. J'ai 12 pouces de longueur. Donc, 12 pouces de longueur, il faut toujours rajouter l'épaisseur du plywood qui est de...
It's just all the measurements. I feel like there's not a lot to say here. The bowl mold that we did before was very clear on his parting wall.
J'ai 5 et 3 quarts, 6 et demi.
If you're somebody, this comment matters for somebody who's slip cast. Oh, I see what he's doing. So he's making his mold boxes fit the boards that he has. So his measurements need to be pretty precise. Whereas the mold boards, the clink boards that we use, I have a variety of sizes and shapes. So I can cut it to anything and then adjust it. But if you see here, he's got to either butt joint it or end joint it, whatever the proper wood terms are. For him, it works. This would drive me crazy because I'm used to a different method. The infamous Chinese mold straps, we still have to show how to use those. Square this out. I would always listen to books on tape in my shop when I was making molds. It was very relaxing, and I would buy the biggest books that I would never read because they're like too heavy to even hold, but I would listen to them in the shop. I think not at that moment, but I would say it improved my vocabulary, listening to these great books. He's going to shave all that away anyways, meaning he's imprinted the clay. And if you think about anything in clay here is going to, in the negative, is going to be the positive in plaster. So any indentations, he's going to be able to flip over in plaster and shave them off. So he can move pretty quickly here. Put your pouring indication line. It should be the equal thickness that he had for the sidewalls. This is his great drill press mixer. He's talking about you always add dry plaster to wet water, and then you let it soak for 3 minutes. And the mixing blade that he has is very ideal because I use a disc, but his blade is not going to whip in air. If you use a mixing blade like a paint mixing blade, it's like a propeller, and you're just going to foam your plaster. And then yeah, super great. The old trusty buckets. So it's perfectly poured. If this is funny, because every time that I would have to go to the hardware store just to buy something, it added up. And it's not that I'm cheap, it's just that I didn't like wasting things. And if you use your buckets a lot, before you pour plaster into them, brush Vaseline in your bucket, and it helps to clean up later. It's a nice trick, and your buckets will last a lot longer. I mean, why use stuff just to throw it out? He's poured that perfectly level. The plaster has set. Remember, this guy's preference is to unmold when it's pretty soft. He likes to shave it when it's shave the mold when it's like tofu. So these are like his memory straps. He takes off the compression band and then puts these here. To me, it's an extra step, but again, it's his workflow, and to him, it's effortless. It's like one workboard this guy has. I used to have like shelves and shelves of workboards. It was always overkill. I always had too much stuff in my shop. I think the reason is that in my shop I was making multiple different types of molds, not just plaster molds, but urethane molds, silicone molds, resin molds, and the scale was never just tabletop. Sometimes it was life size, larger than life size. Other times it was architectural molds on the sides of buildings. So my shop needed a little more space and a little more versatility and equipment. See, to me, this is shaving it almost too soon because you can kind of wobble it a little bit because that plaster moves away so easily. You see the flashing on the side there where it dripped down the corner? It's really no big deal. If they're big leaks, it is a big deal, but a small one, irrelevant. You see his trash can in the back there? It's like a rolling cart, which is a nice design, but he's got a metal strip on it for scraping. So that's terrific because if you just have a trash can with a bag like me, I'm always wiping tools against the edge of the trash bag and it tears the bag. He just straight up has a metal scraper there. It's a terrific cheat idea. Remember, if you're using Sureforms or anything like this, after you clean them up, spray them with WD-40. So, from first take, it doesn't look like the mold wall was very good. You know, in my mind it was like this, but because he does the cleanup and the surfacing afterwards, you know, it's easier to straighten out plaster than it is to straighten out clay. I used to put my clay, I would always put a piece of wax paper down just to help it come off of the board. You wouldn't think it's a big deal, but it can help. So if you're somebody who uses water-based clay and you're peeling away clay like this, the temptation is to pull the clay and then squeeze it. But if you squeeze the clay, you've just sort of buried your bits of plaster in the clay. So clean the plaster off before you compress it. And I actually don't compress the clay when I throw it in the bin because why handle it? It just feels good, but why create that extra step of untangling clay for yourself? This is fancy. Vintage, very Da Vinci. I don't know what it's called, but I never used those. I just used a square with a pencil, and I would just kind of trace around it. But if I'd known about this, I would have bought one. It's kind of cool. I mean, I didn't know about this because I wasn't around any mold makers. And when I was learning mold making, there was not YouTube. There was whatever book I could find and whatever mistake that I made and that I learned from. You know, boo-hoo, walk some miles in the snow. It's not that. It's just that I didn't have access to another pro's commentary. Yeah, he's just going to indicate where the pouring gate is because he's going to want to place that back in there. Now, glass pieces don't usually fall out like this. He's getting it pretty. Everything looks easy on camera. So his technique is really good. Those lines are very valuable to him because now he's just going to surface it down to that line. Now I get it. If his dividing wall had been this wide instead of this wide, the width of his wood plane is this wide. So one pass of the plane basically cuts the whole mold wall versus he could have created multi-levels by scraping here and then scraping here lower, and he would always chase out this little line. So this is a Sureform. This is more of a rasp. I only used these. Yeah, see how fast that shapes up? You can't do this in clay. You have to have a really hard clay to get smooth surfaces. Well, basically. There's no rules, but that's my experience. Now, if he had overshaved that, he would have been shaving down past the midline of the bottle and actually creating an undercut. So it's very important what he's doing. The sandpaper. I like that he cut his sandpaper in strips. It never occurred to me I used to kind of tear off pieces. but it's a nice way to handle sandpaper.
Alors, je vais marquer.
For me, I only used wet-dry sandpaper because the dry sandpaper always clogged up too easy. Here's the marks for the mold keys. We've seen this.
Deux ici, puis un ici.
Yeah, super clean. Oh, he's cutting counterclockwise. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's not a tooth. It's just yeah, that is counterclockwise. On camera, maybe it's playing tricks on my brain, but I don't know.
Très important de bien nettoyer notre moule avant de remettre le modèle, le prototype.
Keep it clean. Now, something that I would do that he seems not to do is, if I was reseating the bottle, I would put soap on the surface, the negative cavity inside, just in case a little plaster flashed down. The other thing that I would do when I'm making multiple part molds is I would throw a little iron oxide in the plaster. I would pour two different colors of plaster. That way I could see if any plaster flashed down to the other layer. If it's white on white, you can't see a micro lamination. But if you have iron oxide and your plaster is red, then you would see if it seeped down under the bottle. Not necessary, but it's so easy to do. Now, these are simple shapes. The shapes that I used to mold would be a little more tricky. They were more like statuary or something like an egg carton, more on the fine art side rather than the production side. So I had some really quirky qualities that I had to pay attention to. I always used to say, a production mold maker is really good at making sinks, toilets, and lamps, but an artisan mold maker, you could give them a cow's tongue and they would know what to do. It's like, oh, I got to freeze that off before I make a mold of it. You know, it's different problem solving. And I was both a production guy and a art guy, so I kind of fought both worlds.
Alors, comme pour à la première partie, étant donné que mon bouchon entre à l'intérieur de la bouteille,
He's just talking about a little gap there with the thread. He may need to clay it in. If he didn't clay it in, air is going to escape when he pours plaster over it, and it'll make a little imperfection in the mold as the air rises out of the bottle.
Alors, j'ai fini de mettre mon argile pour enlever la contre-dépouille.
Yeah.
Je vais me préparer. Je vais remettre ma boîte. C'est-à-dire, avant, je mesure tout le temps l'épaisseur de mon moule.
So this is pretty important. What he's doing is he's measuring the thickness of the bottom mold half, because he wants each mold half to be, if this was 3 inches, this needs to be 3 inches. Otherwise, he has a lopsided mold in the sense of the porosity exchange. Plus, it's just sloppy craftsmanship. So he's going to transfer that. Sometimes you can get caught with a short box, and you have to raise the. He may do it. You have to post the box up a little higher if you don't have enough different sizes. It's easy to start a mold and then realize, oh, I just ran out of room. I know I need a taller box. I love watching this guy pour. It's always perfect. That's the perfect pour. It's like just almost too late. You used to be able to test it before I knew, is you could draw a little X in it in the top before you pour, and if that X starts to leave a trail, it's ready to pour. Like if you can drag an X across it, it's too late. But if it moves across like a motorboat and disappears, it's not ready to pour. But if it just leaves an ever so slight shadow, your plaster's ready to pour. So we'd call it the X check. No more creative than that. Yeah, he bumps these boxes early. I was not that. You can see it delaminated a little bit on the edge there. Not critical, just me. I see things that are interesting to me. It was nice also, he swept into his hand, you know. All these motions make a difference. Why sweep onto your board, then onto your table, then into the trash can, or you can just go in your hand and then trash. To me, this is like his signature thing, you know, kind of these heavy carved corners. It's satisfying to watch. It looks like a little casket. All right, now he's got to let it set because remember, plaster as it sets, it gets hot, which means it expands, and in a rigid shape, it may lock the piece in. So most likely he'll let it sit there. Let's see if the camera cuts. Boom. Yeah, he's not using wet dry. Maybe it's different in France. In the States, the wet dry is green. Right over the trash can. This guy does not buy new stuff, right? He just use it till it dies. I wonder if he eats the same thing for lunch every day. I was like that. I'd get the $5 footlong for like 10 years, you know. I'm preserved on the inside. All right, this is looking good. Let's see if he nailed it. Of course he nailed it. There's no drama to build here with this guy. People struggle with this part a lot, is they'll get a shape stuck in there. Okay, let's say your shape was stuck in there. What do? You take your whole mold half with the bottle and you put it in water. And you kind of rock it a little bit and you get that water to kind of go into the seams, and it actually separates the mold better than trying to do it with air. A lot of times I had to soak pieces out. Yep, keep the keys shorter. There's other reasons why the keys should be shorter, but sometimes clay gets into the keys and then the keys actually create a separation between the two pieces, but not often. Not with a mold like his, I wouldn't worry about it. His seam lines are perfect. You know, it's a fun, if you're ever with a mold maker, it's always fun to ask them what if they've ever molded something, like a quiz. He's going to make what I call a block mold off of this, because in production, you need to be able to duplicate these mold halves fast. And the way that you make a duplicate mold half is you basically pour material into the mold, and it captures the negative space and the seam lines. And you use a different material. You have to use a heavier hydrocal or ultracal to make a block. Ultracal, it's more like cement. So he's boxing this up. And he's going to pour, yeah, he's you know, he'll pour this big heavy thing in there. And then they would have an assistant later box all those blocks up, and then they would pour plaster, and then they would make 100 molds without having to do the clay wall or cut the keys. It's basically a mold making Xerox machine. In production, they would make a case around it that was maybe epoxy. Like if you ever tour Kohler, who makes sinks and toilets and engines and things like this, their blocking cases are all made of a type of epoxy. And they're these beautiful molds, and then they have these machines that just pump in plaster like a gas pump. And they just make because their molds are huge. And they got to pour like 100 pounds of plaster in a shot. They don't even mix it. They got a machine that mixes it, that de-airs it, and they flood it into this plastic master mold, and then it comes apart in pieces. And Kohler's neat. They have a artist in residence program. I'll talk about it later. So now he's making ultracal. Ultracal has a different ratio to it. It's at least twice as dense as pottery plaster.
La quantité d'eau multipliée par
I think it's, oh God, it's been 15 years. What would the ratio be? It's like 2.5 times the amount of ultracal by weight than to water. It's a very, very dense material, but most people tend to pour it too soon. You have to mix it for almost 10 minutes before it seems to incorporate itself. Otherwise, the mix will separate. The ultracal settles and the water rises to the top. So you want to mix between, I don't know, I'm going to say 6-8 minutes. 10, longer is okay. And this is with room temperature water. I used to put accelerators in my plaster, and hydrocal especially, because it just takes a damn long time to set. But this guy, I mean, I failed many times at pouring these. I was not good at the other materials, ultracals. When you buy it, they give you a ratio sheet. Now that will weigh twice as much. It is like a cement anchor. You'll see the water, well, he won't have a problem with it. Let me look. Oh, even then, just a little bit. What happens is the water will come to the surface and then it will reabsorb. So you don't want to sponge it off. Just let it happen. Yeah, if you don't shape that up quick, you know. And the blocks typically aren't shaped because they need sharp walls. Because you need to be able to build a box around it that's tight. So you just need to sand off the sharp edges, because this stuff gets sharp like a knife, and if you run your hand across it, you'll take a cut that's impressive. Yeah. In the big mold shops, what you would see is they would put in foundry type into the mold box. Foundry type is basically lettering that is backwards, and you would nail it into the mold box so that when you pour your ultracal, the mold has a name on it. Because if you imagine, ultimately you're going to have a big room that's a library, and you're going to have many bottle molds, many cup molds, many bowl molds, that you have to be thinking about your inventory system of your molds. What was it called? Who made it? And these foundry type, they sell it in kind of like a zinc and plastic. Nowadays they do it in plastic. It's a handy little, it's kind of fancy. Now, he's had to let this set a long time. A couple hours and maybe even the next day. Now, if you can separate it like this, you're golden. A lot of people will try to use a chisel and go into the side, but that messes up your surface. And if you mess up the surface of your block, that's going to be carried out into all your duplicate molds. The other thing is sometimes people will separate a mold with the chisel, and they'll go in and they'll knock one of their keys off. So if you put your keys in the same place every time, basically you always know not to separate there. Oh, he makes it look easy. Nail it. Now, he had a little chip out there. I think he was concerned about that early on. It's no big deal. Now, the nice thing you can do with ultracal is you can polish it. So Plaster will take a shine if it's dense enough. You can take a drill and a buffing wheel and really shine this up. It's really good because it not only closes the pores, but it gives you a better surface finish. You just have to be careful not to over polish the hydrocal, because you can kind of burn away some material. You will begin to chew it if it's not completely set. But that's going next level. If you're polishing the master blocks, you're a fussy motherfucker. Yeah, looks clean, huh? They're objects of art on their own. I mean, even if the mold didn't make other molds, they're just kind of beautiful things to put in a library.
remettre nos caissons.
Yeah, so what he's saying now is here's how you use it. You put your box back together, you would put your release agent in there, and then you pour liquid plaster on top, and then boom, another bottle half, another bottle half, another bottle half. In closing, he makes everything look easy, and I think that after you make some molds a while, it does get easy because the motions are very repetitive. Although for instructional reasons, molds are made of generic objects, I'm always one to encourage, once you know how to make a mold, make something that matters. Make something that is interesting, make something that is unique. If you're only copying shapes, like this next video we're going to critique is a teapot, the chances are there's a commercial mold making studio that's already made that mold and you can buy it for 50 or 60 bucks. And you think, oh, 50, 60 bucks. Oh, no, well, you see what it takes. Your day is worth more than 50 or 60 bucks and the work is done for you. So make something that matters, make it as beautiful as you can, care about what you make, and appreciate guys like this who are sharing what they know. So thank you again, Richard Lambert. We're going to put the link for his stuff there. He doesn't have too many videos. I think I found maybe six or 10. So we're going to critique another one here because this carries over into the thinking. Thank you for watching this video. We're getting ready to launch a new platform called Hand-ufacturing. It's going to feature a lot more educational films about mold making and casting, from very basic to advanced mold making. Our hope is that it helps the business entrepreneurs out there learn efficient ways to manufacture their products and bring a lot more wealth into their household. Stay tuned.